So one of the things I'm most commonly asked in iPhone development is how do I get it to pop up, say, what might be called a message box or an alert box in other languages. Now, the iPhone itself does have its own very specific methods for doing that. So let's go ahead and show you how. I'm going to make a new project in Xcode. It's an iPhone view-based application. I click Choose, and I'm going to call this Alert Me. And we're going to do a very simple application that immediately pops up an alert message. And you can use some of the other techniques to make this happen on a button click or when somebody touches a user interface element. But we'll just have this happen immediately, and that'll give us two things. One, how to make an alert happen, and two, how to do something immediately. So all these files are created for us by Xcode when we create a view-based application. The main thing that we're interested in is typically the view controller. And if I look at the viewcontroller.m file, if I want to make that easy, I can filter them down to just show classes and say viewcontroller.m file. I see that Xcode gives me a file with all sorts of things in it and a bunch of stuff commented out. And I can look at a few of these things and see that there are things commented out for auto-rotating to interface orientation and view did load and load view and init with nib name and all sorts of weird things. Now, one of the places I could put some code if I wanted things to happen immediately is actually here. Notice that it says implement view did load to do additional setup after loading the view, typically from a nib. And that means it's loaded in whatever interface elements were defined in our .xib nib file. So I'm going to uncomment this. I can just take away the asterisks and forward slashes. This method, viewDidLoad, is actually defined in the UI view controller class, which means it occurs in any view controller we have. We just have to decide whether we want to use it or not. I'm going to leave the line super viewDidLoad in there just in case it's doing anything that needs to happen. I'm going to put in my own code here. And this is where I'm going to inject some code that will kick off as soon as the view has loaded without any other interaction from the user. I'm going to create a new UI alert view. That's the class we're going to use. I'm going to call this alert, and it's equal to, we're going to allocate and initialize it. So UI alert view alloc space. I start typing init, and it pops up one of these options here, init with title. This is what I want. If I wanted to check what other options were here, I could hit the escape key and I'd see I've got init, init with coder, init with frame, and init with title, or more formally, it's actually called init with title, :message, :delegate, :cancel button title, :other button titles. You might think, good Lord, that is the entire name of the method. And this is basically the way to create a alert view and give it all the information that it needs to know to get set up. And that's the one we're going to use. Now, fortunately, this one being Objective-C, I'm going to break these lines up a little bit so we can make it a little clearer to read. So before init with title, I'm going to hit this return, and then a return again before message, and then before delegate, and then before cancel button title, and then before other button titles. Good Lord. So I'm going to click on the placeholder, the first placeholder here, after init with title. And I might take a guess here that it's asking for a NS string for the title. So I'm going to give it that. I'm going to give it a string literal by using the @. Here's the title. Now, if I've got multiple placeholders for where I'm supposed to inject these arguments, one way I can jump from one to the next is using the control key and the forward slash. So that's highlighting the second one. What's the message? Well, I can give it another string. Here's the alert message, so we can see what happens here. Then the next one is going to be ID delegate. What's it asking for here? Well, this is just a placeholder, and it's basically saying if your alert view had multiple buttons on it and you needed something to be defined to handle those buttons, you would define a delegate here. Now, I'm not actually going to do anything. I'm just popping up an alert view, and I want it just to go away when it's done. So I'm going to hit Control / to jump to that point. I'm going to say I don't need anything here. Now, the way that I say I don't need anything is I'm going to say nil. This is the equivalent of null in other languages. It's basically saying an empty object. What can happen here is that if it tries to find a delegate, it's going to just send messages to nil. And that's actually allowed in Objective-C. They'll just disappear off the face of the planet. But that's fine. We don't need anything to happen here. And then the next one, I'm going to hit Control / to go to the cancel button title. What do we do to make this thing go away? I'm going to give it another string for OK. And then finally, other button titles. And again, this is because your alert view can actually have multiple buttons on it. We only want one, so I'm going to jump by hitting Control// and give it 0 for that one as well. If you wanted to do other buttons, take a look at the documentation for UI Alert View. I'm going to close this because this is now defined, so closing / and enter that. Looks a bit ugly, but just so we could fit it all on one page, this is the way we're going to have to do it. Now, this doesn't actually pop anything up yet. We've just defined this object. We have created this new object. To show it, what we're going to do is call its show method. So the object I called alert space show. That will pop up that alert box. If I want to be good about this, I should also say that after that, I'm going to be done with it. So alert release. We're going to call release because on line 36, we defined it by saying alloc, then it's our responsibility to take charge of this object. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to hit Command B to build it and make sure it compiles and builds. And then let's try it. Let's click build and go. It should load in and immediately bang up. There we go. So I can see by dragging this to the side what the different placeholders are. Here's the title, was the string that we put in for the title on line 37. The message is what we put on line 38. And the cancel button title was what we put on line 40. So very basic way of interacting, but there's really two things to take from it. Here's how we do an alert view in Objective-C for our iPhone, which is the UI Alert View class. And to make something happen immediately, we put it in the viewDidLoad method, which is commented out by default, but you can just uncomment it in your view controller and put whatever code you want there.